All right, let's get back to our top story today as Pope Benedict shocks the world with his resignation announcement this morning. He will be stepping down at the end of the month. John Moody worked as the chief of Time Magazine's Vatican Bureau. He also wrote a biography on Pope John Paul II. He's the executive vice president and executive editor of FoxNews.com and also has interviewed Pope Benedict in the past when he was Cardinal. John, welcome.
Thank you very much,
Very
Martha.
good to have you with us this morning. What's your reaction to this news?
I think it's one of the bravest things I've ever heard of. Nobody gives up power willingly. Nobody gives up power without forethought. For this man who really the world hasn't gotten to know very well, despite the fact that he's been around as Pope for 7 years, to do this, I think, speaks volumes about the kind of man he is and the kind of leader of the church that he insisted on being.
Yeah. You know, obviously Pope John Paul II was a rock star was one of the phrases that had been used for him, just so popular all around the world, so popular with young people. It was a tough spot to sort of step into. And he was determined to go on and on and on, and he felt that being infirm was part of his worship in many ways to God. And we have a quote from Pope John Paul II that I'd like to pull up if we could. He said, "Despite the limitations brought on by age, I continue to enjoy life. For this, I thank the Lord. It is wonderful to be able to give oneself to the very end for the sake of the kingdom of God." So here we have Benedict making a different choice, and you say that it is very brave.
I do indeed, and if you just look at how Pope John Paul II looked at the end of his life, as you just saw on the screen there, I mean, he was a horrible pallor of what he was when he first took the papacy, and he was this young, dynamic Polish guy that came out and spoke every language known to man, skier and canoeist and all of that. Benedict, I think, came into the papacy reluctantly. He is a thinker, he is a scholar, a theologian. He didn't want the limelight, but I think, just as you indicated, he wanted to continue John Paul's legacy and make sure that nothing radical happened, and radicalism to Cardinal Ratzinger and then Pope Benedict was just anathema.
We have seen over the course of the history of popes, in some ways, this kind of person who comes in for a shorter period of time. And it was, as you and I were discussing in the break, felt at the time of Pope John Paul II's death that he was the right person to sort of to keep the faith, to hold on to the gains that had been made under John Paul II. What have we learned from Benedict about what comes next?
I think the Pope served, if you will, his time with great honor and valor. The Church, when it elects popes, has a history of going long pope, short pope, long pope, short pope. Obviously, when they reached out to elect Karol Wojtyła, who became John Paul II, it was after John Paul I had served only a few weeks as pope. And so they were shaken by this immediate death of their leader and wanted somebody younger and more robust. I think that might be what you see this time again.
I wonder, people talk about Cardinal Dolan in New York as one of the, no doubt, we're minutes away probably in the news cycle from starting to put together lists of people who are considered. Would he be looking, do you think, to other parts of the world, or going back to, it was a big deal when they picked the first non-Italian in a long time in Pope John Paul II. Where do you see this going? Any idea?
I think the Roman Catholic Church has internationalized itself, and it can't go back to being a little Italian conclave anymore. Cardinal Dolan has to be in any serious consideration, any serious talk about who might be next. Yankees fans all over the world would celebrate, of course, but he's a wonderful man. Being an American is not an immediate advantage when you're in the conclave to be Pope.
Very interesting. John, thank you so much. I know we'll be talking with you throughout this process, which will be extending over the next 4 weeks at least.
Hope so.
As we continue to watch all this. Thank you, John. Good to see you as always.